I think the right way to do it is you start small first, and then you take a look at, how the arrangement works. I mean, start small, and, as you're starting small, put a system in place, develop checklists, set very clear expectations with the person who's doing work for you, review their work, properly provide feedback.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sufyan, your host, once again back with you on another episode of CPA Talk Series. Welcome back in this latest, fresh, new episode of CPA Talk Series, the podcast where we explore how forward thinking CPAs, tax advisors, and accounting firms are staying ahead with smart global strategies. Today, we are joined by Tony Malik, founder of Point Square Consulting, a firm known for its razor-sharp focus on international tax and complex offshore compliances. As an international tax specialist and an enrolled agent, Tony brings years of industry knowledge on navigating FBARs, 5471s, 5472s, FATCA filing, and foreign disclosures. These are things that most firms find intimidating. So, in this episode, we will explore how firms like Tony's manage high stake international tax work without losing focus on growth, and how strategic outsourcing can play a vital role in scaling up without compromising precision. If you have ever faced the challenge of handling cross-border client audit defense, or just staying compliant in global tax world, and wondering whether offshore talent could be part of the solution, then you are going to find this episode especially relevant. Thank you very much for joining this podcast, Tony.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Sufyan, and thanks for the invitation to be here.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So let's dive in very quickly without wasting much of your time and our audiences. If you can just walk us through your journey, Tony, from being a COBOL accountant and a part-time master's student to founding Point Square Consulting, it is truly inspiring. So, what were the key experiences like working through FATCA or at a boutique international tax firm that shaped your approach to building your own firm? And are there any decisions you would have approached differently? What are your thoughts on these things?
Oh yeah, I have plenty of thoughts on these things. So I guess I'll start first with my journey and then talk about, 2020 hindsight imbued me with. So by the time I was getting my master's degree in accounting, I was already working as a Covell accountant for one of the top tax attorneys in Atlanta. And this particular law practice was 100% dedicated to criminal and civil tax controversies and almost nothing international. So it was purely domestic tax controversy. Got to work on all types of things related to corporate tax evasion, organized crime, and how the IRS was busting them, pursuing them, and what my role was. So this was all very, very interesting work. But again, it was all domestic. But around 2009, 2010, the landscape, of U.S. international tax practice really started changing because the law known as the FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, went into effect. And pursuant to this law, what was going to happen is the IRS was going to start focusing on international enforcement. And the two partners at that firm at that time, they had already been in practice for over 30 years and they were getting close to retirement. So I was, a younger guy working for them. So they pulled me to the side and they said, Tony, this is an area which is going to be big in the future. We already have a specialization and we're getting close to retirement. So it really doesn't behoove us to start learning this at this point. But we want you to take the lead and we want you to start developing an expertise in this area because we're anticipating picking up more work over here and we'll support you whatever way you need. We'll enroll you in professional continuing education courses, professional legal education courses to help you learn this, but we want you to take the lead on this. So,
and we're talking about 1990s? I'm sorry?
No, I'm talking about the 2000s. I'm talking about the 2000s.
Okay.
This is about 2009, 2010. and I
Okay.
started getting into international. And at that time, I mean, a lot of the focus was really on foreign bank account reporting and, being able to recognize, what the proper classification of these different investments would be here in the US. So it allowed me to basically get my foot into the door of specialization, whereby I was getting actual hands-on experience in international after doing domestic tax work for several years. And after picking up a little bit of experience in international, I started working for a boutique international tax firm, which was started by two guys who left one of the big four firms both at the same time. One of them was a partner in the New York office. The other one was a senior manager in the Miami office. And I don't know how they knew each other, but they work for the same firm, so it might be a networking event. But they both left about the same time and started a small international tax practice. And I started working with these gentlemen. And I ended up doing a lot of heavy international tax and cross-border transactional work with them. And I got some excellent experience there, but I did not like the way they were running the practice. So eventually after getting about 3.5, almost 4 years of experience with them, I already had several years of experience by that point. I was a seasoned professional. So once I got my master's degree, which I was attending part-time, by the time I got done with my master's, I just went ahead and started developing Point Square, because by that time, my own book of clients was steadily increasing because this boutique firm had hired me as an independent contractor rather than as an employee. So what happened is I was not tied to them. I was not solely tied to them. I could also pick up work on my own. That was the agreement. So because I was going to these professional enrolled agent, National Association, CPA meetings, etc., giving out my business card, I started getting somewhat of a reputation of being someone who does this specialized work. So once I got enough clients, I brought up the conversation with the owners of the boutique firm and told them, hey, listen, I'm kind of at the crossroads here. If we want to talk about having me as an employee, having benefits, health insurance, and everything, right now would be a good time. And they were very non-committal about everything. They were like, okay, we understand what you're saying, but let's table that conversation for another day, which, I took it as just a polite way of saying that thanks, but no
No, we
thanks.
don't want it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not an offer that,
Hmm.
speaks to us. So I went home. I was somewhat dejected, but, in retrospect, it was probably one of the best things that happened to me, because in about a month, I, made a firm decision that I'm going to turn in a notice and I'm going to start developing Point Square and, smash the rear view window. And here we are in 2025 now.
Awesome. Awesome. Any story behind the name Point Square? Any philosophy for that?
Yeah, there is actually. Yeah. So that's a good
Maybe
question.
in
So
brief
when
you can cover.
Yeah, so initially, I mean, the idea was that, the services that we're going to offer are going to be so precise that they are going to be on point, you know, and they're going to be so on point that you can, basically, like, I mean, it's, it's going to be like point squared, it's going to be to the second exponential. So based on that, I was trying to figure out, what an appropriate logo would be. And I running short on ideas, so I decided to, retain the name, but then come up with a different logo. And I was like, okay, instead of squared, we'll go with a square, and we'll put a dot into it and try getting creative about it. So that's kind of how it emerged over
Interesting.
yeah, over a
Interesting.
process of innovation.
Got it. So the second part of the same question, any decision that you would have approached differently, anything that you could have done differently, you ever think about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, I think about that. So I mean, there's of course, a lot of things that I would do differently, but there's a couple of things that definitely come to my mind. If a scientist came to me and they said, Tony, we've developed a time machine and you can use it to do whatever you want. One of the things that I suspect I would do is go back and start Point Square Consulting and immediately start putting in some processes in place, which I did not put when I first started because I was so overwhelmed with everything. But, in retrospect, yeah, in retrospect, I feel as if that was something that was manageable. So one of the things that I would do differently is I would develop a better system for filtering prospective clients. Because initially when I started my practice, let alone not being cognizant as to how to properly price engagements, I did not even know how to best select clients, how to best pick clients. And I ended up picking a lot of clients on whom I actually lost quite a bit of money. So these were either no profit or low profit clients who would demand all types of things that were beyond the scope of the engagement. And I, just to keep them happy, I would begin offering them basically the chop for, no countervailing benefit, because I was just happy that I had work at that time. So that's something I would do very, very differently. I would be much more selective in who I would take on as a client. The other thing that I would do differently is I would have more confidence in my abilities, because when I first started off, I was more diffident than I should have been. And what I mean by that is I had all the wherewithal, I had the technical expertise to take on some really good projects, but because there was a lack of confidence on my part, I turned those projects down. And after being in the game for almost 2 decades now, I realized that that was a big mistake, because I did have the expertise to take on those roles. But because I was diffident, I felt as if I needed more training or more expertise. And now that the bulk of my practice is actually coaching CPAs, enrolled agents, tax attorneys on international tax cases, I realized that, I was so far beyond them, even when I first started, when it comes to international. But these people are bolder, and they would take on the work, and then on an as needed basis they would team up with a specialist such as myself to get them to wherever it is that they need to be in order to serve their client, which is a much wiser approach, a much smarter, much more business savvy approach than what I did, which was that, hey, we'll take a linear path and just gain more experience, and once I'm completely satisfied and confident that I can handle this work, it's only then that I would take on some of these challenging cases. So that's something that I would do. I would do differently. That was a mistake on my part.
Well, I mean, I get it completely, and I think it's pretty natural to have this kind of an approach, especially dealing with international taxes, which is always full of challenges, is what I've heard. So, having that lesser amount of self belief is quite natural, and also taking anything and everything comes your way when you have just started the business is also pretty natural, because that is the stage when you are building up your business. So you wouldn't say no, you wouldn't dare to say no to any business coming your way, even if it is like it that it is not going to give you the kind of a profit that you should get. You won't get the returns that you are the kind of amount of time you're spending, you're not going to get that kind of a return, but you still do it. So pretty natural stuff, but I'm glad that you have a different perception, and it is surely going to help all the listeners understand, especially if they're starting something similar or something on the similar line. It will definitely help them. Okay. So, like I was saying, that international tax is always it always demands precision, and it also requires deep expertise. So, in your experience, what tasks within this space are ideal for outsourcing, and what function should remain in house, and why?
Yeah, that's a very balanced question. I'll try answering it the best I can. So, the first thing that, folks need to realize is, of course, there are some very definite benefits of outsourcing. And I think that, particularly particularly tax generalists, I think they make the mistake of wearing too many hats. They're trying to be all things to all people. They're trying to be the marketing person and also the technical person and also the bookkeeper and also the admin person, and that is a surefire way, a sure shot way of having your practice suffer. And I think it's going to suffer because it's going to cause burnout in the owner, first off. It's going to result in low client satisfaction because you're a jack or Jane of all trades, which is not ideal, because we live in a complicated world of taxes that demands at least some sort of expertise, if not a full blown expertise. You know, you're going to hit revenue ceilings because so much of your work, a disproportionate amount of your work, is going to be tied up in routine tasks, so you're not going to be able to take on as much business as you would like. So, like we have to recognize that outsourcing, has some very, very clear benefits. Now, there are some things that can be outsourced, and I would argue that they're primed to be outsourced. So we'll talk about first. I'll first touch on things that I think are really they're primed for outsourcing, and then I'll mention a couple of things that I much my opinion only, that they shouldn't be outsourced. So I think that bookkeeping is something that can be easily outsourced. So as an international, and I'm speaking from an international tax practitioner's point of view, we deal a lot with businesses. So these are either U.S. businesses that have activities outside the U.S., and alternatively, we work with foreign corporations that have some sort of activity in the U.S. They're going to need bookkeeping services, just the way any other business would. Although there are some differences, there's some slight differences, but any good bookkeeper who has experience is going to be able to accommodate their needs. So they're going to need all the same things that any other business would need. They're going to need financial statements, income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows, general ledger, etc. That's something that absolutely should be outsourced rather than a specialist handling them. The other thing that goes along with this is payroll tax work. That's also something that can be easily outsourced. Now, whether it's a U.S. business with outbound activity or whether it's a foreign business with U.S.-based activity and they have employees here in the U.S., they're going to have payroll requirements here, and something like that can and should be outsourced. The other thing is income tax returns. They can also be outsourced, but I would say that because the return preparer is potentially subject to penalties, they need to review everything. So as long as they review everything and there's a system in place, and there's an understanding with the outsourced professional to whom you're delegating everything, those should be outsourced. And so those are some things that can be outsourced and should be outsourced. And, one of the reasons why, I'm also bringing outsourcing up is workflow in our line of work is very unpredictable sometimes. So you can't necessarily take on the fixed costs of hiring new employees and then, having them on payroll. And then all of a sudden, if you enter into a time of lull, what do you do then? I mean, do you try mustering up work for them, conjuring work for them, or do you lay them off? It becomes difficult. So it might be wise to partner with someone who provides, like an offshoring service. I mean, that will be good. Now, getting to stuff that shouldn't be outsourced, I would say that, in my opinion, international information returns should not be outsourced. And these would be things like Forms 5471. This would be things like Forms 5472, Forms 8833, which is a treaty-based analysis. These types of returns, I would say, should not be outsourced because the penalties, if they get wrong, are quite draconian. So if there are a substantial number of errors in them, the IRS can argue that the taxpayer has not substantially complied, and then penalties for these forms start at $10,000 a pop. Wow. For Forms 5472, For Forms 5472, the penalties begin at $25,000 a pop, and they only go up from there. So because the stakes are so high, something like this should only be done by someone who's very, very competent and is very, very experienced in this area. And these types of forms, typically, I mean, we prepare these for other CPA and other enrolled agents, and like even some law firms will get in touch and say, can you handle some of these for us? So these, really, I mean, you need to be very well versed in the underpinning law before you can do these forms. And so what happens is, for example, if you take a look at a Form 5471, which is considered one of the most difficult tax forms, it's, the writing is all Greek to anyone who takes a look at it, because the descriptions all have to do with code sections of the law. And even if you look at the government instructions for these forms, they just reference you to the regulations. Take a look at code section this, take a look at regulation section this. So you really have to be well versed in the underpinning law to be able to properly do these forms. So those I would be hesitant to say that those should be outsourced, although it's not inconceivable that you may have professionals abroad that are very proficient in those. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would say, I'm hesitant to say should be outsourced is FBARs, if they're going under one of the IRS amnesty programs, something like a streamlined foreign offshore procedures or streamlined domestic offshore procedures, because if things get omitted from them, the taxpayer can potentially be in a very precarious situation because the IRS can argue that they have not acted, they've acted willfully, that they have made a fraudulent representation, a fraudulent disclosure. And because of that, they can deny the taxpayer the benefits of that amnesty program. And there's a case that came out a few years ago. It's called the United States versus Rahman, in which this problem came up. So because of that, that really sent a chill down the spine of international tax practitioners in the U.S. So that's one of the things that I would also say, outsource it only if you have a really good relationship and you've been working for a long time with the person, at the firm that's doing work that you're delegating to them. So those are some hesitations that I have.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate saying that I would slightly have a bit of a disagreement here, Tony. Not a disagreement, just my different way of looking at things. So first of all, I 100% agree with you that one should not be doing everything by himself. Your first point, and I usually tell this to my clients and prospects that you cannot be an accountant and a business owner at the same time. You got to choose what do you want to be. You want to be an accountant or you want to be a business owner, because then if you're not on the driver's seat of your business and you are doing everything by yourself, then you won't move your business anywhere. You The first thing you need to learn to be a good businessman is the art of delegation, be it to your internal team or to the external support that you get from an outsourcing team. Like with regards to FBRS, I 100% agree with you. But on 547172, since there is no regulation like 70 to 16 for 1040s, what we do here, I'm just giving you a real life example here. A lot of time it so happens that a CPA who has not worked on 547172 at all and who doesn't know what legislation changes have been incorporated and what has changed when he studied that while doing the CPA certification, and today in this kind of a scenario they do choose an outsourcing partner like us,
Oh,
because with
wow.
yeah, because with Datamatics Business Solutions, we have some CPA level, ACCA level, EA level executives, and they are specialized on these things. So any complexity, be it 547172, we welcome it. But again, it is, I once again agree to you that it should be a case only when they do not have a capacity or capability of managing it internally, is when this needs to be outsourced. And if someone is having a kind of a practice wherein they do get a lot of clients with this kind of a requirement, then obviously they know it, how to take care of it. That's a different story altogether. I'm only talking about the scenarios wherein a CPA or a tax practice owner hasn't done it since years, and all of the sudden there is a client who has this kind of a requirement, maybe a new client. So in that kind of a situation, they do come up to us and they ask for this kind of a requirement, and we fulfill it. Yeah. Okay. Let me turn the direction a little in a different direction now. Let's talk about hesitation to outsource. I'm not aware if you speak to a lot of CPAs and a lot of accounting companies wherein they do mention this. But since I speak with 3 to 5 CPAs and tax practice owners on a daily basis, I see that many firms hesitate to outsource due to concerns like control. concerns like data security or even insurance coverage. So, from your perspective, how real are these concerns, and what steps can firms take to confidently and securely integrate outsourcing into their existing operations, Tony?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Okay, so I think a good way to answer this would be this way that, I mean, loss of control, I mean, that might be illusory to some extent, or it might be over exaggerated in one's mind to some extent, because outsourcing, I don't think it should necessarily be looked at too differently than delegating to like an employee, I suppose, because that is a sort of relationship that you develop whenever you're outsourcing to somebody. So I mean, if nobody's saying that, like, I mean, just team with an outsourced partner and then hand them the shop. I mean, I think the right way to do it is you start small first, and then you take a look at, how the arrangement works. I mean, start small, and, as you're starting small, put a system in place, develop checklists, set very clear expectations with the person who's doing work for you, review their work, properly provide feedback, and over time, you can start expanding the amount of work that you're handing over to this person who's doing work for you. And again, I mean, I touched on this earlier, but the benefit of that is that in our work, in our line of work, predicting workflow is very difficult, because there might be some times that you might have so much work that you're unable to do it all. And on the other hand, there might be periods when you fall somewhat into a lull. So you don't want to pick up the fixed costs of hiring staff, but you can outsource that. Or at least have somebody on standby to whom you can delegate work, when the need comes up. And you can also stave off preparer penalties, because this is something that scares people. They're like, if somebody makes mistakes, but we're the one who's affixing our name to the return, we might get penalized and jeopardize our license, whether we're an enrolled agent or a certified public accountant. But if you put a system in place, you have checklists, you're setting clear expectations, you're reviewing their work before signing your name on them, then you stave off preparer penalties this way. You're not blindly approving anybody's work. So that's something that, I think would be beneficial for people to know. The other thing is, you can have an understanding with the person or the firm that you're offshoring work to. I mean, would they be willing to use the same software that you use in your office, so that way you can transfer files back and forth? And I would imagine that they would be more than willing to accommodate the U.S. firm. So, for example, if the firm uses PTX versus Search versus Drake, I wouldn't be surprised if the offshoring team has access to all those various software and they can accommodate you. So that's something that can be discussed. Another thing, that might be a hang up for professionals in the U.S. is they might want to check out, they might want some type of assurance from the team that provides offshore services, is what type of data security measurements do they have in place? What kind of protocols do they have in place? And that's something that can be discussed. Whether a team is in India, whether they're in the Philippines, whether in Mexico, whether in the US, I mean, a lot of the software that, is accessible is the same. And, the business processes are remarkably similar. At least that's been my experience, working internationally. And then the other thing is, you can also talk about, what the offshoring departments, offshoring enterprises hiring practices are. How do they select people? How do they hire people? Are these reputable professionals that they're hiring? That's a discussion that can be had. Another thing that I think that would make professionals less hesitant in the U.S. is they can talk about what type of insurance the outsource enterprise has, and if a dispute comes up, where is that dispute going to be resolved? So that's something that should be discussed. Limitation of liability, yeah. And last but not least, I mean, I would also say, get blessing from your U.S.-based insurance, professional E&O insurance carrier as well. And I think they would be fine with it, as long as the persons in the U.S., as long as they're going by the letter of the rules, they should be fine because, if you're outsourcing work, I mean, you have to get pursuant to section 7216 of the tax code, you have to get written permission from the client that they're going to be fine with work going offshore. So as long as you're doing that, the insurance company is going to cover you, I would imagine. But this is something that if you put in a call to the insurance, to your representative at the insurance company, I think you can easily get an answer to that as well, especially because this is an established practice now. I mean, this is not something fringe. I mean, this is very much a part of American practice now. So I think insurance companies are also savvy to this. They understand that this is a business reality professionals are facing. This is one of the ways people are running their practice, and people are going to need, coverage for that. So I'm sure that they're cognizant of this, they're aware of this, and they have a process. So once you take all these things in aggregate and take a look at them, I think that will go a long way in assuaging any anxieties or any hesitations that people in the U.S. may have.
Makes sense. And thanks for highlighting these points, Tony, because I get this kind of a question almost daily from our prospects that I talk to. So I had not been covering a lot of these that you mentioned. So thanks for educating me on these. I do cover things like, yeah, I do cover things like, for that matter, Datamatics Business Solution is an AI CPA SOC 2 compliant company. We are ISO 27001 certified. So because of these certifications, there are some policies which are very stringent in nature that we are supposed to follow. And that makes the whole, and that makes the whole ecosystem foolproof enough. And then with regards to the IT infrastructure that we use, we never take any information from our client system to our system. It always remains in their platform, their software, their cloud storage. So I mean, at times I think about, does 7216 really matters? Because they are not actually sending any information to us. We are rather getting into their platform, their software, just like any other remote employee would do. And we take care of the work in their software itself. So first of all, there is no hassle of transferring the files from here to there. Nothing goes out of their network, and everything remains in a very limited and controlled environment. So
Very good. Very good.
these are the things I had been talking about. And obviously the third point that you mentioned, that it's always good to hire the right kind of a staff. So when a CPA is working with an established organization like us, and I'm not saying we are the only one, we definitely have some good competition in the market. We have some good players. Those are established outsourcing companies. It's very important to hire right kind of a staff, because irrespective of how robust a system you are building up, if someone is not having the right values and right intention, they will find a loophole in that. In the first question, I told you that 547172 international tax. I mean, always have heard about very complex. No, we don't want to do it. We are outsourcing because we don't do it, or we don't want to do it. So with global tax rules constantly evolving, uh, first of all, firms needs to stay very sharp. So how can outsourcing help free up their valuable time and mental energy for professionals to focus on high impact areas like specialization, or like you did, continuing their education, and any client strategy that they want to use?
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's another good question. I mean, the thing is, I mean, we have to understand that, time and energy, mental energy in this case, because we're knowledge workers, they're very precious, unlimited resources. So we have to be wise with respect to where we're allocating them. And if we're doing a lot of work, which is, like a lot of the routine tasks, then what we're really doing is we're losing the opportunity to focus on some more of the higher functions, the more value added functions, the more lucrative functions. And we're also robbing ourselves of the opportunity to specialize, whether it's international, whether it's estates and trusts, whether it's multi-state taxation, whether it's mergers and acquisitions taxation. So we really, rob ourselves of the opportunity to specialize, if we're trying to wear too many hats and trying to be all things to all people. So, I mean, once you get into a specialty field, I mean, just trying to keep up with the tax rules that are coming out all the time, that's a gargantuan task. And if your limited time is disproportionately tied up in routine tasks that are best done by somebody else that you can just review, then you don't have the time to focus on developing an expertise and staying relevant in the market, and that can really spell disaster in this day and age. So that's the first thing. So that's the thing. If you're not outsourcing or if you're not delegating, if you'll allow me to use that word, then you're really doing yourself a disservice when it comes to time. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention, which I think is an important part of the conversation, is even if you're able to muster up the time, you might not have the mental wherewithal to handle these higher functions if so much of your mental energy is being used on a lot of these routine tasks, because you're going to be too tired to actually research regulations, interpret the law, and apply it to a client's facts and circumstances to understand what the tax ramifications of something are going to be, or trying to do a 5471 or something, because there's a lot of cognitive fatigue that sets in. And, just a few days ago, after we first talked about, me potentially, appearing on the podcast, this is something that, I wanted to just kind of look up. So I looked up and, sure enough, learned a little bit about the neuroscience of mental fatigue. And it turns out, yeah, I did. And it turns out that this is not just something purely psychological or something that, is in a person's mind. It's very much physical. So when yeah. So when mental fatigue sets in, Sufyan, one of the things that happens is there's several parts of the brain that are impacted, because of which you're not able to properly do your work. So I had to write this down, but a portion of the brain which is impacted by mental fatigue is known as the anterior cingulate cortex. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for focus and decision making. So that's a part of the brain where you have reduced activity once mental fatigue sets in. The other part of the brain that starts getting impaired is the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain which is responsible for memory. And last but not least, when mental fatigue sets in, there's a lot of cortisol that's also released by your brain. And cortisol transmits neurotransmitter function. So basically, your melon isn't functioning at perfect capacity. So, even if you have time, that's just one of the things that's required of you in order to do your work. The other and more important part of it is actually your mental wherewithal. So if you don't have that, and if you're not wise in managing that, then you're going to be at just as much of a disadvantage as never having the time. So we really have to be very wise where we're allocating our time, especially if we intend to remain relevant. We intend to continue being heavy hitters in the industry. We really need to develop the wisdom to know where we're going to spend our energy and resources, especially when workflow is unpredictable. You might want to partner with someone.
Wow. Thanks for taking some time to do some study around science, which is obviously not your subject, Tony. I'm glad you did, and this is interesting. This is why this kind of podcasts do help, not only for the listeners but for the host and for the guest both. That we learn a lot of things. So thank you so much
Oh,
for that.
sure. Yes, yeah.
Well, we are already like in the 39th minute of the podcast. We are already running over the time. But one last question for you, Tony. Looking ahead to the next 6-7 years and even beyond that, how do you see the role of outsourcing evolving in the tax industry, particularly for the firm who want to scale up, who want to adapt to global complexities and stay competitive in the talent tight market?
Right. Well, first off, I want to say that time really does fly when you're having fun, right? I didn't even realize.
Yeah, and the wavelength matches.
I didn't realize that we've been yammering for 39 minutes. So, okay, I'll try answering this as quickly as I can. So I think that there are going to be phases in which the industry is impacted, especially as outsourcing becomes something more and more pertinent and more relevant to U.S.-based firms. So I think that one of the things that's going to happen is that this acceleration, this trend is only going to accelerate in the next 6, 7, 8 years. And I think it's going to accelerate because there's a talent shortage here in the U.S. The other thing is that there is firms. Firms are becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of outsourcing because about 10, 15 years ago, yeah, 10, 15 years ago, I mean, this is really a fringe idea, and not a lot of people were jumping onto that bandwagon, but today they are. And it's become not only unacceptable, but even considered a boon to practices. So US based professionals are becoming very, very comfortable now with outsourcing. The other thing that I think, which is also going to accelerate this trend, is also because clients are becoming more receptive to the idea of an offshore professional doing the bulk of their work and then a US based professional just reviewing everything, because it helps keep their costs down as well. First, and secondly, they're also becoming more receptive to this idea because they have to sign a what's it called a disclosure and authorization for the U.S. firm to outsource work. So that's also on an industry-wide basis, also making this acceptable to the end user, the end recipient, I should say, of the service. So there's comfort being developed on the part of the service recipient as well. And, especially, these days with communication as quickly as it happens, I mean, you can jump on a video conference call and everything. I mean, you can be speaking to a professional in Australia, in Thailand, in anywhere, just the way you would as if they were sitting in the office right next door to you. So that's also facilitating and accelerating the pace at which outsourcing is becoming not only more and more relevant, but much more acceptable to all parties involved. So I think that's what's going to happen and continue happening, I should say, in the next 6-7 years. Now, once we go beyond, 7-8 years, maybe, we can even go further than that, beyond 10 years, 20 years. I think that's where things really get interesting. And I think what's going to happen is because by that point, if you go beyond a decade, I'm guessing maybe 2 decades, I don't know. But if this trend keeps accelerating, I think what's going to happen is eventually, the outsourcing firms are going to become not only more relevant, they're going to become more needed. And one of the ways that need is going to manifest itself is they're going to enter the US market in a more bold way. Because right now, they're basically relying on a middleman, on CPA firms here, accounting firms here to feed them work. Eventually, what's going to happen is, once there's greater acceptability of this, once there is greater comfort around this, clients, people in the US will directly reach out to offshore firms and try getting work to them, try cutting out the middleman. And I think offshore firms are also going to try doing the same to cut out the middleman. They're going to directly enter the market and market themselves here in the US, and I think that's the way things are going to go. And there's at least one firm that I know, well, actually, I know more than one. I do know several professionals that do, very good US work, and they're not in the US. So, these are typically a couple of people that I know that are in Canada, but they do work which is just as good, if not better, than what people in the US are doing. I also know somebody in Mexico City that, does excellent work. Now, he's a US citizen, he's an American guy, he lives in Mexico, but I think the point still stands that you can have professionals outside the US doing really good US based work. And I know at least one firm, this is a large firm, I think they're based in India, they're called KNAV, and they are not an outsourcing firm, they're a firm based in, yeah, they're a CPA firm, that they're not US based, they're India based, but they also have a US presence because I know somebody that they hired who is basically their US presence. So I think you're going to start seeing more of these types of arrangements where you have offshore firms that are more directly entering the US market, cutting out the middleman, because that's what makes sense to them. That is the logical next stage of the evolution. So that's going to be interesting, especially if offshore professionals. These are not dim-witted individuals. These are extremely intelligent people, And they're becoming U.S. CPAs. They're becoming enrolled agents. They're traveling to the U.S. and taking the bar exam over here and becoming U.S. tax attorneys. Oh, I know one Israeli lawyer who's licensed to practice in the U.S. but practices out of Israel. He's extremely good. So if you have these non-U.S. based professionals, but they have U.S. credentials and they have U.S. expertise, and there is receptivity in the market and acceptability in the market, it makes sense for them to directly enter the market. And I think that is what's going to happen in the distant future, not in the near to intermediate, but in the distant future. That's what my speculation is. Now, I could be wrong about this, but I think that is the how the evolution is going to occur in this industry.
No, absolutely. You are bang on right, Tony, because the trend that we are talking about is already there. So, just to give you an idea, with Datamatics Business Solution, we do very limited outreach. A lot of business that we have that we are currently working with, those are the clients who researched about an outsourcing company and they found us in their Google search, and that is how they found us, and they directly reach out to us. So we do a very limited outbound reach. They reach out to us, and with regards to the captive centers, point on that front, as in a lot of CPA practices, the big size, obviously the top 100 CPA practices, they have their own captive centers here in India or Philippines or Pakistan and other places of the world. But even in spite of that, it's very difficult to manage a captive center as well. So we are working with some. Unfortunately, I can't name them, but some big top 100 CPA practices that we are working with. They have their offices
Wow.
in the yeah, they have their offices in the States. They have their offices in India. In spite of that, they have outsourced some amount of work to us because they don't want the at least the basic level of data entry work to be done by any of their employees, and they want their employees to be engaged in better revenue generating activities.
Well, no, you guys are definitely heavy hitters in the industry. So yeah, I mean, this is I'm learning a lot from you. Thank you. Yeah.
No, absolutely. 50 years, what it takes to be a giant like what Datamatics is today. In fact, last Friday, we celebrated our 50th anniversary, Tony.
Oh, all right. Well, happy 50th.
Yeah, I'll send you some pics and videos for that.
Good, good. I'll
All
look
right.
forward to
Well,
it.
thank you so much for your time, Tony. Very interesting conversation with you today. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure our listeners must have enjoyed equally. Thank you for your presence today.
Well, the feelings are mutual. I can assure you that. So, okay. So I'm going to get on with my day over here. And thank you so much. This has really been a blast.
Thank you. So, all the listeners, this is a wrap on today's episode of the CPA Talk series. A big thank you to Tony Malik for sharing his journey and insights on managing complex international tax work while scaling smart. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep building forward. Thank you.